Welcome back to another random video by your friend, Matthew. So perhaps I could start a series called the Versus series, Versus. I did a video called Being versus Becoming. Yesterday I did a video called The Divine versus the Sacred. And today I'm doing a video called The Soul versus the Spirit, or the Spirit versus the Soul. In the same way that my ideas about the divine versus the sacred are just kind of ideas that I came up with. That's how my ideas about the soul and the spirit are. I suppose that my ideas about the soul and the spirit are obviously influenced by things that I've heard or read. But also, I've gone a little bit in my own direction about this topic. So, one thing I've been thinking about a lot in terms of spirituality is similar to the being and becoming issue. It is very similar, actually. And so this tension or this phenomenon or this component of reality revolves around that which is conditioned versus that which is unconditioned, if there is such a thing. If there is such a thing as the unconditioned, that's kind of the big question. Most spiritual traditions have some idea of the unconditioned. Perhaps that's one way we could think about how God is conceived in any given tradition, even though the conception of the conceptions of God may be very different. But in most traditions, ideas about God include the notion that God is unconditioned. One of the only schools of thought that I can think of that has an idea of God as changing and conditioned is process theology. Process theology, among other things, says that God is changing instead of unchanging. Very interesting. Aristotle had the famous way of thinking about God as the unmoved mover. Similar, the unmoved mover. Probably an idea and a phrase that I need to explore more and reflect on more. So, the way I've been mapping it experimentally for myself is kind of two components or expressions or attributes of the absolute are soul and spirit. Obviously, we don't have to use these words, but I'm using them because they have traditionally been words used in religious and spiritual contexts. And it's fun to play around with traditional words and bring new life to them. It's fun to play around with traditional words and breathe new life into them. So I suppose that's what I'm doing. I think about the soul as the changing, the dynamic, the conditioned, that which remembers and leaves traces and evolves. That which remembers and stores and leaves traces and evolves. I think about the spirit as the unconditioned, the transcendent. The infinite. And I suppose I associate spirit with, or I see a correlation between spirit and the Tao in Taoism. I associate spirit even with emptiness, shunyata, in Buddhism. I associate the spirit with pure consciousness, pure awareness in the Vedantic and Tantric traditions. So spirit and consciousness seem related, if not the same thing. And I think that, there's more to say about soul than spirit, because since spirit is transcendent, it's hard to talk about. And so when I talk about soul, I'm not talking about an individual soul, even though we can think of it that way. And most of these ideas or terms, to me, have a micro version and a macro version. So we could imagine the micro version of soul is our individual soul. And when I say an individual soul, I'm not necessarily talking about a soul that carries on after the body dies, per se. That's something that I don't feel confident enough to talk about. I am totally open and at least halfway convinced that it's very possible that some sort of individual consciousness lives on after the body dies, because of things I've watched and learned and read about with near-death experiences and claims of access to past lives and stuff like that. But it's still a topic that I'm learning more about and reflecting more about, and I don't have a firm stance on it. So when I talk about individual soul, I'm talking about an individual's psychology and inner life, inner world. And to be very radical about it, I would say that the body is part of, the physical world is part of the soul, as I think of it. And so an individual's body is a component of their individual soul, because they are this individuated, particularized expression of the absolute. Every individual thing, every individual thing is. This little notebook is an individualized expression of the absolute. And so every individualized expression, you could say, is or has the component of an individual soul. And so beyond the individual, if the soul is that which leaves traces and stores and remembers and evolves, it's kind of like this field that stores things and that remembers and evolves. Even the field itself either evolves or fuels the evolution of things that are created out of it. So I think that an individual has access to this massive field, this massive soul field, and that allows them to have access to information, whether information in the way that we usually think about it, or biological information, genetic information, these sorts of things we can access each individual can access that, because each individual is a wave that is created out of the infinite ocean, the infinite soul field. And so Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious is similar to the way I see soul in a big way, or like, I guess, is similar to the way that I see soul in the context of humanity. I mean, it seems like humanity's soul is related to Carl Jung's collective unconscious, that stores archetypes and symbols and themes and motifs and images and stuff like that are seen across cultures all over the world at various points in history, and the mythologies that various cultures create that have a lot of overlaps with them, that Joseph Campbell did such a good job at highlighting and discussing and synthesizing and drawing attention to their similarities and differences. But so these kind of shared myths and shared archetypes seem part of the collective soul, and that's why people can have dreams that have archetypal images that seem to be way beyond their own individual personal lives. It's like, this kind of where did that come from type of experience. And so, the soul field and the world of changing phenomena, right? The world of nature, the world of changing phenomena, the evolving world of form that is dynamic and always in flux and changing and transforming. That world of form is the world of soul to me, because the soul is conditioned. It is changing, I think. So it's possible that when possibly new insights or new ideas get discovered by people, that gets stored in the collective soul of humanity. This is just a thought experiment, but it's possible that somebody on one, in one part of the world, who comes to some sort of insight and or discovery, that perhaps that gets planted in the collective soul, and then somebody on the other side of the world might have access to that insight through some sort of transmission or non-local consciousness, right? This idea of non-local consciousness, where time and space don't limit these things, because the field somehow transcends space-time on some level. And so the world of changing form, I guess the last thing I'll say about that is sometimes I'll get tripped out just thinking, like, how does the world of form continue to evolve? and continue to have novelty in it, right? Terrence McKenna talked about novelty so much, like the universe is this kind of novelty creating engine or something that is just constantly springboarding off of the complexity that came before it in order to create more novelty or more complexity. So it's similar to like Ken Wilber and holons and stuff. It's like everything includes and transcends what comes before it. And so it's constantly there's a constant element of novelty that allows it to evolve, because if there was no novelty, then it would stay static. And so that capacity to have novelty and to have something new introduced so that evolution can happen, that's a mind bender right there for me. And perhaps that is made possible by the spirit, or the unconditioned, or emptiness, So I do want to say that even though these videos that are pinning two things, this versus this, in this case soul versus spirit, I know that can sound dualistic, but when I use language, when we use language, we just have to be honest and flexible with it and playful with it, and acknowledge that, like, when something gets brought into language, it automatically becomes limited and dualistic. And so it's hard to get away from that with, when you're using language. But I do want to say that I don't see soul and spirit as two separate things. They are connected and essentially one. And it relates, my ideas of soul and spirit definitely relate to Shiva and Shakti in, the tantric tradition and like Kashmir Shaivism and stuff, where Shiva is kind of the unmanifest, the formless, the transcendent, and Shakti is the energy, or the infinite surplus of whatever it is that emits energy or gives life to energy or something, but just to be simple about it, it's like usually Shiva is like pure consciousness, Shakti is kind of pure energy. So Shakti is related to the world of form, the world of change, the world of embodiment, the material world, and Shiva is related to pure consciousness, or the unmanifest. And even in that tradition, ultimately everything is seen as no other than Shiva, no other than the absolute. So it gets a little complicated, but I find myself, the traditions that downplay or de-emphasize form, the world of form, I feel uncomfortable about those. Maybe that's because I'm attached to the world of form, or maybe it's because I just want to have more of a holistic and healthy spirituality. And if I live in the physical world, then I want to not have I don't want to see the physical world as something to escape from or look down upon. I love certain Gnostic texts, but Gnosticism at least has the reputation, and some of the texts support this view of Gnosticism, which is that often this earthly realm, this world of form down here, is seen as very inferior. And I don't like that about Gnosticism. Similarly with Advaita Vedanta, even though people argue about how to interpret Shankara, who's the basically the founder of Advaita Vedanta, who was commenting on old Upanishads and stuff in the 8th century, I believe, 8th century CE. Generally, people who practice Advaita Vedanta seem to stress this idea that although there is nothing outside of Brahman, the absolute, somehow the world of form is just an illusion. So there's this tendency in that tradition to see the world of form as illusion. So therefore it's something to downplay, de-emphasize, escape from almost, right? But that's why I like the tantric tradition, because it comes back and says, well, wait, if everything is an expression of, if there is nothing outside of the absolute, then this world of form is an expression of the absolute. That's something I can get on board with. So I would say that to me right now, this notion of soul and spirit, I think that soul and spirit are just the two primary expressions that are, two sides of the same coin, that are ultimately one organisms that operate together and can't exist without each other. And so the world of form, transformation and novelty and evolution is actually part of why that's possible, is because of spirit. And because spirit is not conditioned, and therefore it can introduce something that is not bound by conditions, if that makes sense. I know some of this gets complicated, and I could say a million things about it. But I hope that makes sense for now, and I'll probably make a part 2. But I guess as a last note, I will just say that whole micro and macro thing. Macro spirit is like the absolute. Macro soul is like the infinite field that stores and leaves traces and remembers and evolves, that we are created out of and obviously have access to. And then micro spirit would be, despite the fact that we're in a limited form with a finite mind, we somehow, since we are expressions of spirit and soul, the absolute, we have the ability to, it's hard to know what verbs to use here because they all don't quite do the job, but just to be loose about it, we all have access to and can activate and reveal and discover and operate from spirit, or timeless consciousness, timeless awareness. And that's amazing. So that's like the micro version of spirit, I guess you could say, is like our own individual access to it, or expression of it. And yeah, those are my thoughts. Leave comments, leave questions. If you ever resonate or not, agree or not with any of these things I say, I would love to talk to you about it. So I hope you feel compelled to do that, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, check out some of the other ones, and stay tuned, because I plan to continue to release videos like this, as well as podcast episodes, which you can check out on my playlist called The Infinite Weird Podcast. And all the videos like this are on a playlist called My Thoughts on Spirituality and Philosophy. And I also have videos about the tarot cards, the major arcana, and I have a playlist called the Tarot Series. So until next time, take care of yourselves. Peace out.